When Chris Rock roasts celebrities, he doesn't hold back. He cooks them right to their face. No script, no safety net, just pure truth that leaves the whole room frozen. Celebrities aren't used to being looked at straight on, especially by someone who isn't afraid of the consequences. Chris does it like he's simply pointing out something everyone else already sees but won't say out loud. One of the clearest examples happened at the Oscars in 2016 when Chris worked out as host. Everyone remembers the big headlines about that year, but the real energy in the room was a mix of nerves and curiosity. Chris had been loud about the lack of diversity in Hollywood, and now he was standing there facing the very people responsible for it. He took a breath and started with a jab at the industry itself. The camera caught different actors smiling, but it was that kind of smile that comes when someone is trying to stay calm in public. It set the tone for the night. Then came the moment with Jada Pinkett Smith. This was the line that people still talk about because it was one of the first times a host roasted a boycott live, directly to the face of the people connected to it. Chris said Jada's boycott didn't mean much because she wasn't invited in the first place. The audience laughed. Some of them tried to hide it, but they laughed anyway. Jada didn't. Will Smith's expression tightened just a little, and Chris kept moving like nothing was out of place. The scene was classic Chris Rock, not cruel, not careless, just blunt. And that bluntness has always been his style. He once said in an interview that his job isn't to comfort the powerful, it's to make sure the joke lands exactly where it's supposed to. And in rooms filled with actors who spend half their careers pretending, his honesty hits differently. A few years earlier in 2005, Chris walked on the Oscar stage and found himself in front of Jude Law and Sean Penn. Hollywood already knew Jude was everywhere that year. His face was in every award season montage. Chris took a lighthearted shot at him, calling out how many movies he had been in. Jude's nervous smile said everything. It wasn't a terrible joke, but in a room where image is currency, even a gentle tease feels like a scratch on polished glass. Sean Penn, on the other hand, didn't laugh. He stood up later in the show, visibly irritated, and tried to defend Jude, saying actors are more than jokes. Chris didn't even flinch. He didn't apologize. He simply reminded everyone that the Oscars weren't a courtroom and he wasn't there to babysit egos. It became one of those moments people still replay because you could feel how uncomfortable the room was. That discomfort is exactly why the moment lives on. Another moment that shows Chris's fearlessness happened in 2014 when he hosted, again, and talked openly about Hollywood's relationship with Harvey Weinstein. This was before everything became public and the room was full of people who had worked with Weinstein or were still working with him. Chris made a point about how Weinstein was such a strong personality that even criminals respected him. The joke wasn't direct, but the implication was clear enough that people shifted in their seats. Years later, when the truth came out, clips of that moment resurfaced. People suddenly looked at Chris's expression and realized he had known the unsaid reality of the industry long before most celebrities dared to comment. Then there's the side of Chris that comes out when he isn't standing on a giant award stage, but in a smaller room with people he knows personally. One of the funniest examples is his long-running teasing of Kevin Hart. Kevin worshipped Chris growing up and calls him a mentor. Chris loves him, but also roasts him with the kind of closeness that only comes from familiarity. There was a night when they were on stage together during a comedy benefit. Chris looked at Kevin like a proud but amused older brother and said he couldn't believe someone that small had a full adult voice. Kevin laughed, but you could see how hard he was working to keep the laughter natural. The audience caught it too. It wasn't just a joke about height, it was a joke about persona, about Kevin's whole style of performance, the swagger, the confidence, all packed into his smaller frame. Kevin later admitted in an interview that Chris is one of the few people who can joke about him without him getting defensive, because the respect is real. The roasting is simply the language they speak. Another friendship-based roasting moment happened with Adam Sandler. Chris and Adam go way back to their early days on Saturday Night Live. Their bond is genuine, but that didn't stop Chris from roasting Adam during one of Adam's tribute events. Chris told the audience that Adam had the career equivalent of a kid who keeps turning in late homework and still manages to get an A. The room broke into laughter because Adam knows that in Hollywood, his films have always been an easy target. He leaned back in his seat, laughing with the kind of comfort that only comes when someone is poking fun at a truth you've already accepted. Chris doesn't just pick on friends or easy targets. He once roasted Oprah Winfrey directly to her face during a segment on her show. Oprah asked him about relationships and why men cheat. Chris leaned back, looked straight at her and said, "Men don't cheat because of opportunity. They cheat because they can." Oprah raised her eyebrows in that signature way she does when someone has just told a truth she didn't expect on daytime television. The audience gasped and then laughed. The honesty hung in the air like smoke. Oprah didn't interrupt him. She listened because even she could sense he wasn't wasn't chasing shock value. He was simply speaking in the way he always does. Another moment people often forget happened backstage at the BET Awards when Chris ran into Rihanna. Rihanna is not someone comedians usually tease face to face because she has a presence that commands space. Chris still went for it. He joked that she always looks like she's smelling something expensive. Rihanna laughed and walked away with that confident glide she has, but she glanced back at him with a look that said she was keeping score. That brief moment between them showed how easily Chris can shift between charm and mischief, even with artists who are known for their edge. One of his more subtle but powerful roasts happened with Dwayne Johnson during an interview. Chris teased him about being so muscular that he looked like he was born doing push-ups. The Rock laughed loudly, but his cheeks turned the slightest shade deeper. It wasn't embarrassment, it was that rare feeling celebrities get when someone catches them off guard in a genuine way. And Chris kept going, saying if Dwayne ever had to sneak into a room, the walls would probably widen on their own. The room laughed harder. The Rock shook his head, smiling, because it takes a special type of comedian to roast him about something that's normally a compliment. Another memorable moment took place during a charity event where Chris roasted a whole row of celebrities at once. One person he singled out was Jay-Z. Chris joked about how Jay-Z always looks like he's listening to music that only he can hear, even when he's in a silent room. Jay-Z laughed, but Beyonce's expression softened into that amused smirk she gets when someone makes a rare joke about Jay that actually lands. Chris wasn't being mean. He was pointing out how Jay carries himself with this permanent seriousness, almost like a philosopher trapped in a rapper's body. Jay acknowledged it with a shrug, and the whole room enjoyed the honesty in the moment. Chris even roasted Eddie Murphy during Eddie's tribute event. Eddie is Chris's hero, the person he looked up to more than anyone when he first started. That didn't stop him. Chris told the audience that Eddie is so talented he could walk into a room, sit down silently, and still be funnier than half the comedians working today. Eddie burst into laughter because he could hear the truth behind the compliment. It wasn't a roast meant to be cut. It was a roast meant to honor. The kind that reminds people how admiration and mockery are two sides of the same coin in comedy. One of Chris's strongest roasting moments is one that people often overlook. It happened during a charity benefit with a crowd full of actors, executives, and Hollywood insiders. Chris talked about the industry's obsession with pretending, not the acting, the public behavior, the carefully crafted reputations. He started pointing at people in the front row, calling them out for the personas they use in public versus who they are in private. It wasn't a noisy roast, it was a quiet one, almost soft, but the truthfulness made it powerful. The camera caught faces tightening, shoulders stiffening, laughter that sounded just a bit too forced. Chris looked at the room and said something that felt like the center of his entire comedic identity. The world doesn't change if everyone keeps pretending. A joke is not just a joke, it's a mirror. And at that moment, he was holding it up to a room full of people who spend half their lives trying not to look directly into anything that reflects too clearly. By the time Chris finished, you could hear the shift in the room, not discomfort, something closer to recognition. That recognition is what separates Chris's roast from the average comedy jab. He doesn't rely on shock, he relies on clarity. He speaks with the understanding that humor can say the things people are too careful to admit, and he does it right in front of the very people who shape the stories the world consumes. This is why people revisit his roasting moments years later. They don't age like ordinary jokes. They age like commentary that finally gets the context it deserves. When you go back and watch the 2016 Oscars, the 2005 Sean Penn moment, the early jokes about the industry, the subtle warnings about power players long before the scandals broke, you realize Chris hasn't been roasting celebrities for entertainment alone. He has been telling the truth in rooms that were designed to ignore it. Celebrities are used to interviewers who treat them like fragile glass. They're used to carefully packaged conversations. They're used to praise laced with caution. Chris doesn't do any of that. He stands in front of them and reminds them they're people who can be joked about like everyone else. Not because he wants to tear them down, but because equality and humor is its own kind of leveling force. When Chris laughs at someone, it feels like he's inviting them back into the human world. The one where you can laugh at yourself without losing anything. The one where honesty is more valuable than charm. The one where jokes aren't barriers but bridges. And that is why these moments stick. Not because Chris is fearless, though he is. Not because the jokes are sharp, though they are. But because in a world where celebrities live behind layers of separation, Chris Rock once said comedy is truth mixed with pain. You laugh not because life is funny, but because laughing is the only way to stay strong. Chris Rock finds a way to sit them down, look them straight in the eye, and remind them they're not untouchable. They're just people, and in front of Chris Rock, people get roasted. And here you have it. When Chris Rock roasts celebrities to their face, what do you think? Please leave your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like, like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss any videos. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.